In the last few videos, we explored array.forEach, array.map, array_sum, and array_every. Now is the turn for array_filter. Filter method does exactly what its name says. It filters an array. More specifically, it filters certain elements from an array. And I'm a strong believer that it's easier to learn on an example. So let's immediately dive into code. In here, I'm going to create an array called numbers. Const numbers is going to be equal to an array that's going to have both positive and negative numbers. For example, -10, 0, -2, 15, -36, and let's do 25. Great, this is our array of numbers. Now, what if we only want the positive numbers in the numbers array? Well, we can use the filter method that comes with arrays. To do that, we can do numbers.filter, so we're calling the .filter method on it. That is a method, so we call it as a function. And then, as with all other methods we learned so far, it accepts a callback function, just like this. Inside of the callback function, the first parameter is going to be one iteration of the loop. As we discussed previously, the best naming convention is that whenever you have an array, use a plural name, and then in here, use the same name but in singular form. So in here, we're going to do number. Now, the question is, what do we want to do with that number? Well, we only want to return the number, so I'm going to expand this. We want to return only the numbers where the number is greater than or equal to 0. So these would be our positive numbers. Great. Now if we do that, and if we console log this array, let's see what do we get back. As you can see, we still get our original array back. Nothing changed. Why that might be the case? Well, filter method is a good method. It is a non-mutative method. More specifically, that means that it doesn't change the original array. And that is good. We don't want to mutate the original array. What filter does, like map, is that it returns the new array. So in here, we need to create a new array, and we can call it positive numbers, and then we set that equal to be this numbers.filter. Now, if we console log positive numbers and we save that, as you can see, we get an array of only positive numbers. It was that simple. So, to repeat, filter method goes through every single element in the array, and then below you can specify what you want to return. In this case, we only want to return the numbers that are greater than or equal to 0. Now, if you're already used to arrow functions, what you can do is immediately get rid of this return and just put that in here. So we can immediately have it in one line, because as you know, arrow without any curly braces, that's an immediate return. Great. If we save that, you can see we get the filtered array one more time. With one change, we could easily switch this to lower than or equal to 0, and then we get all negative numbers, including the 0. Just to go a step further, I want to show you how we would do this with a normal for loop. So, in here, we can create a for loop. We're going to have an index that starts at 0 and moves until the numbers.length. Great. And then we increment the I. Now, in here, basically what a filter is simply a loop that has an if statement. And inside of this if statement, we can check if numbers I, that numbers I is more specifically this thing here, the number for each iteration, and if it is larger than or equal to 0. If it is, then we can create a new array called positive numbers 1, and this here should have been positive numbers, plural, my bad there. And that's going to be set to an empty array. Then in here, we can use positive numbers and then push to it. And what are we going to push? Well, the numbers I. Great. And finally, then we can console log positive numbers after all the numbers have been pushed. Let's see if it works. As you can see, it works. But if I remove console logs, take a look at this. This here is the code for doing it using normal for loop. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 lines and a lot of complexities in here. Take a look how line 3 is simple, concise, and straightforward. That's the power of the filter method. Now allow me to provide you with a more real-life example of a filter method. We're going to get rid of this code, and then in here I'm going to create a new variable. That variable is going to be called employees data, and it is going to be equal to an array. Inside of that array we're going to have multiple objects, so I'm going to span it across multiple lines, and our first object is going to have a name of, let's do Sebastian. Great. And also Sebastian is going to have an overtime of 5 hours. Then let's create a new one. In here let's do Cardi V, and in here she's going to have an overtime of 10 hours. And then finally let's do something like George Lopez. Great. And he's going to have an overtime of 12 hours. Now, let's say that we want to reward employees with 7 or more hours of overtime. How would we do that? First of all, we have to add commas here, and we have our employees data. Well, now we have to filter out the array to find only the employees with overtime of more than 7 hours. Great. To do that, of course, we are going to use the filter method. So in here, I'm going to create a new array called employees to reward, just like that. And that's going to be equal to employees data dot filter. And then in here, we're going to get that singular employee. Great. Now we have to either return it or not return it. And now we're going to check if employee dot overtime is greater than or equal to 7. If it is, we're going to return true. Why are we returning true? Well, if the true is being returned from the callback function of the filter, that means that it's going to keep that specific employee or the employee for that specific iteration. So if the employee has the overtime greater than 7, we're going to keep him or add him in the employees to reward. Let's see what is the output of this by doing a console.log, and then in here, we're going to put employees to reward. As I do that, we get an array with 2 objects in there, where the first one is Cardi V and the second one is George Lopez. Great. Now I'm going to show you how to simplify this even further. Try remembering one of the initial lessons in this course. It was about comparison operators. My question for you is, what is the output of this comparison right there? Or, as a matter of fact, what is the output of all comparisons? If we do this, what do you think we're going to see? I'm going to remove this console log and save the file. As you can see, we get false and true. All of these are booleans. Great. And since filter works in a way that if we return true, then that must mean that we're going to keep it, and if it returns false, we're not going to keep it. So what we can do is just literally return this. If you return only that, the output of this is going to be a boolean, so there's no need to actually have an if statement there. That's the difference between normal for loops and then adding an if statement there and just using a filter. And as you know, since we are using an arrow function, we can immediately bring this right here by removing the curly brace. And that's going to look something like this. Great, that's it. Now if we go back and if we console log that, let's see what is the output. As you can see, the output is completely the same, but we made it so much simpler. With all of these array methods that use arrow functions like for each, filter, map, you're often going to have an arrow function with an immediate return. Great. Now I have one small task for you. What would you do if I asked you to put only the names of rewarded employees in here, not the full objects? So right now we're getting the full object with the name and the overtime. What I want would be the output that looks like this. So, just the names. What do you think? How could we achieve this output? To do that, I'm going to create a new array called const employees names or employee names. And then right there, we're going to loop over this newly created array, employees to reward, and then we're going to map over it. In here, we of course get the employee. And then for each employee, what we're going to do is simply return employee.name. That's it. Now I'm going to console log employee names, and these are the employee names that we want to reward, and that's it. And that's it. As you can see, now we are rewarding Cardi V and George Lopez. We could go even one step forward and provide a personalized message for each employee that received the reward. For that, we would use array for each. So instead of this console log, we could do something like this. Employee names dot for each. In here we have the name, and that needs to be in parentheses because that's a callback function. For each name, we want to console log, and then let's use a template string, and then in here we're gonna have name received a reward. That's it. Now if we save that, you can see on separate lines, Cardi V received a reward and George Lopez received a reward. We just mixed 3 different array methods we learned on a, let's say, kind of real life example. And that's going to be it for this video. We not only learned how the filter works, we tested it on 2 different examples and also remembered how map and for each work. Great job!